Paranormal Dimensions is fortnightly on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
A dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse far down the road. A long, agonized wailing, as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another, and another, till, borne on the wind which now sighed softly through the pass, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of...
I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Good day to you. This is Sir Patrick Moore, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal radio network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello, and welcome to the return of Paranormal Dimensions on the Paranormal UK radio network. I'm David Young.
There was a job to be done, and as he silently rode, where evil violently flowed, they knew he'd live or he'd die by the code. A man who rides all alone.
Okay, thank you, fellas. Where was I? If you've listened to the show before, you'll know that I stopped doing the shows at the end of last year. That was purely for personal reasons. I also felt at the time that I'd taken the shows as far as I could. It was then that I found out via the many messages of support and also many listeners' disappointment of the show's demise that the show was far more popular than even I realised. I'm still amazed by that. Okay. Now, I have to be honest here, I really never expected to ever be making a return to the show. But 6 months later, here I am, once again. So in this instance, I now have to say gigantic thank you to all the people who took the time to contact me via messenger and also email. It's because of you and your encouragement that I'm back here talking to you today. If you're listening to this, I certainly hope that you are, after you asking me to reconsider. I really have to thank you, and you'll all know who you are. It's a gigantic thank you, and it's too many names to read out, but again, thank you so much for your love and support. I really appreciate you. Okay, now a few weeks ago, I attended the 2-day Outer Limits magazine conference in Hull, where the main guest speaker, who had flown in from the US, especially for this conference, was the great Mr. Peter Robbins, who gave 3 amazing talks. Even my wife came with me on this one, and she thoroughly enjoyed the whole weekend as well. Now, Peter has previously been a guest on this show twice, and he's agreed to make yet another visit later this year. And in this instance, he's going to talk about his Rendlesham experiences and also his disappointments in his having to sever his connections with his co-author of Left at Eastgate, which was also withdrawn from publication over the many untruths and inaccuracies which were found by his co-author, which have been discovered and shown to him. If you don't know the full story, Peter made a massive statement concerning this severance of their friendship, and you can find it on his website. Peter will probably go more into that when he comes on the show. It has to be said that Peter's own section of the book is still a work that he's rightly proud of, Peter had previously stated that his professional interest in the Rendlesham UFO subject would be one which he would not involve himself in again. He's now reconsidered that position and feels that he owes it to the readers of the actual book to finally draw a line under his own involvement and its demise and the reasons for it. And I can understand how he feels. I mean, I've spoken to him personally about it, and it sort of really broke him. So if this particular subject interests you, a show to watch out for later this year. Continuing with the Outer Limits magazine conference, which was mostly arranged and marvellously put on by Chris Evers, who actually produces the magazine as well. Well done, Chris. The other great speaker lineup was Mike Coville, Sasha Christie, Malcolm Robinson, Paul Askoff, Philip Kinsella, Ronald Kinsella, and Paul Sinclair, all of whom have appeared as guests on this show at least once, some more than once. And they're all good friends. Also on the speakers list was Mr. Colin Saunders, and I hope to have him on the show too in a not too distant future, along with Mike Coville, who's agreed to come back and give us another great show. He did a really interesting show the last time, so he'll be making a return visit too, hopefully. If you're not a subscriber to the online only Outer Limits magazine, I would really highly recommend it. Also for its very reasonable price. It's a very fair price, and it's a brilliant magazine. It's probably the best sort of online UFO magazine out there, definitely. I shall be looking forward to seeing Paul Sinclair again in a couple of weeks too, at the 3-day Chariots of the Gods Awakening convention in Blackpool, where Paul will be speaking alongside such as Eric von Daniken. I'm so looking forward to meeting Eric again. I've been fortunate enough to meet him a few times before. Giorgio Tsoukalos is also going to be alongside Eric von Daniken. So if you've watched Ancient Aliens before, there's Andrew Collins, Barry Fitzgerald, Davinia Taylor, Billy Carson, Johnny Enoch, Hugh Newman, Andrew Goff, Maria Wheatley, Steve Mira, Dr. Teresa Bullard-Wyke, and Richard Doty. It's going to be a fantastic weekend, and I can't wait. I have great respect for all of these speakers. So if you are there, please look out for me. Say hi. I'll be pleased to say hello to you and see what you think of the show, and if you've got any ideas about future guests. Right, with all that out of the way, onto this show. Oh, just before I do that, you may have already noted that Paranormal Dimensions will be fortnightly now, not weekly. I had already started just a couple of shows before we stopped at the end of 2021. So you will now hopefully have 26 shows instead of 52, which quite honestly was becoming too much to handle for me. Okay, that's the reason why I cut them down to 26. Okay, right now, on with this show's amazing guest. A few weeks before I attended the Outer Limits magazine conference, I'm pleased to say that I and my lovely wife Jill will join me again for an event called Festival of the Unexplained, which took place at Bosworth Hall in Leicestershire, here in the UK, of course. And it was here that I met our guest, Mr. Neil Storey, someone whom I'd only heard of in legend and had seen countless book titles bearing his name, mostly about the UK life during the Second World War. Neil is a grand historian in this field. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about this during the show. Neil was one of the speakers of the 3-day event, and we were fortunate to have him join us on a day trip around the area, along with other guests from the US and home. I can remember that rainy day. It had been sunny the day before and sunny the day after that, but that particular day, on the day out, it decided to rain. So it was a great day, but it was a bit miserable as well. The Tennessee Wraith Chasers, who you can see on the Discovery Plus channels, were joined us on the trip. Patty Negree, Daniel Klaus, Rob Thompson, Maria Schmidt, Penny Griffiths Morgan, Richard Freeman, and good friends of ours already, Barry Fitzgerald and Philip and Ronald Kinsella. What I can say is Neil was a pleasure to be around and threw out some amazing anecdotes during the day, made us all laugh a few times. Later, over the 3 days, I had made up my mind that I would indeed be returning to the show. And I asked Neil if he would consider coming on to the show at some point. And Neil immediately said he would do the first show with me. So here we are. Now, we have just passed the 125th anniversary of the Bram Stoker classic Dracula, not Dragula. And Neil has done much research into both Bram and his evil vampire creation. I'm sure we all have our favourite Dracula movies. My own personal favourite was the Christopher Lee characterizations. I found him to play the menacing and evil vampire to perfection in the legendary Hammer Studios horror movies, along with Peter Cushing out to destroy him. They were great fun and great stuff. And I kind of miss those more innocent days, really, the sets and everything. And of course, seeing Dracula in colour after the old black and white ones was something to behold. Anyway, yeah, it's great stuff. We shall endeavour to find out Neil's opinions and his own personal favourites, if any. The Vampire Legends is something I have always wanted to delve into on this show, as you may have heard me mention a few times on older shows. A year or so ago, I picked up a couple of beautifully illustrated large vampire books from a charity shop when I lived in Suffolk. We live in Essex now, but and I immediately grabbed them with both hands upon spotting them on the shelves, and they have a proud position on my bookshelves. I shall put some photos on the Paranormal Dimensions Facebook page if you'd like to come and visit and take a look at a few. I'll be putting up a few photos from the weekend as well when I met up with Neil, if you're interested. Anyway, I am really excited to welcome Neil Storey to the show. But before we do, a little bit more about Neil before I welcome him on. Neil R. Storey is an award-winning historian who is internationally recognised as a leading authority on the darker side of Britain. He has written over 50 books, including Jack the Ripper's London, The Dracula Secrets, Jack the Ripper and the Darkest Sources of Bram Stoker. That's all one title. The Little Book of Death, The Victorian Criminal, London Crime, Death and Debauchery, and is the creator of the popular Grim Almanac series published by History Press. I have to say, the Little Book of Death is great fun. It deals in all different ways of people dying and everything like that. It's got some funny anecdotes in it. You wouldn't believe some of the stories. These titles are loner enough to draw any reader into between the covers. They are most certainly, great fun. And I've got a few of them myself. I would urge you to have a look at for yourselves on the Amazon site and probably on eBay as well to see these endless titles for yourselves. I think a lot of them are out of print now, but you can actually still find older copies and good condition ones. Known for his groundbreaking research and original projects, Neil lectures for academic and social audiences across the UK and around the world. Neil is a well-liked and respected figure in this field. I can now second that, having met him. He is blessed with a warm wit and has been master of ceremonies and speaker at numerous conferences and special events over the years. He frequently appears as guest historian on factual television and radio programs, such as Most Haunted, Who Do You Think You Are, and Help My House Is Haunted. He has just recently completed another episode, which hopefully we shall hear about. So I'm very proud to welcome Mr. Neil Storey to the return of Paranormal Dimensions. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to the show, and welcome to the show, Neil Storey.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your show. Good to be here.
I'm really honoured to have you on the show, Neil, because I was lucky enough to meet you a few weeks back at the Festival of the Unexplained in Bosworth Hall in Leicestershire. And
yes.
I was just explaining to you off air that you're one of the ones that made me come back to this show, actually, when I was speaking to you. And you're one of the ones that sort of spurred me to come back. I was actually in doubts as to whether I was ever had to do, come back and do the show again. But so I've got you to thank for that. Well, you're one of the ones anyway. One of the important ones.
It screamed to me that here's a man that loves broadcasting, and it would be a crime if you didn't carry on doing something that you clearly do very, very well.
Well, I do try my best. I mean, if you just said that to me about 3 years ago when I first started this, I knew nothing about this. I never had any intentions of doing a radio show at all. But I was actually, because I was involved in a couple of other things, I was invited onto a few other radio shows, as the guest. And I was offered a show of my own. And then the Paranormal UK Radio Network said, "Oh, you want a show? We'll give you a show." So I thought, "Oh, okay, I'll go over to you then." It's not as if I get paid any wages or anything. It's just that that's kind of the way it works. And I've never dreamed.
You've got to have the passion for it.
Yeah.
And you really have, and you've got that interest. So I think it's great that you're back on board. I hope I will do your faith in me justice, having you as your returning
Absolutely.
guest.
I mean, I've got to say, when I met you, and you came over as such a lovely personality, interesting, funny, and full of fantastic stories, and and that day on the trip, that rainy day, remember on the coach trip, we went out to the.
I did.
And we had the Americans, but it's all getting soaking wet on the battlefield and everything.
Absolutely right. Yes, that was a day I found the museum particularly interesting. Because it was covered. It was covered. It was warm.
Right.
So many things to
get wet and
fascinate.
muddy. It's exactly how I feel about it. It's typical though. The day before was brilliant sunshine, and the day after was brilliant sunshine. But that particular day had to pour with rain. But anyway, hey ho.
The delights of British weather.
Anyway. As I was talking to you about, one of my interests has been like vampires and things like Dracula, and I know you're very involved, and you got very involved in researching Bram Stoker. Can you tell us a bit about that and where you are with that now? I think you've done another book or something.
Yeah, well, I've had an interest in vampires, Dracula, and Gothic horror really for most of my life. It was a forbidden fruit when I was a lad. Because I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 1972, which is the year that Dracula, AD 72, this famous film that came out, this Hammer wonder, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And I remember seeing the posters for that and the other Hammer releases when I was a kid, because they always kept them running in the local cinemas. They were very much I grew up in Norfolk, and it was very much a town cinema, so they'd have releases that were quite a few years out of date.
The days of the double feature as well, wasn't it?
Oh, you're telling me. And I could see these posters. I could see Carry On films looked fun. They looked funny. I couldn't go and see those. I was too young. And I certainly couldn't go and see the X-rated Hammer films, the Dracula films. Yeah. All I saw were these quite iconic and eye-catching images. I've always loved history, and I thought, what's going on here? It's kind of Victorian, it's a bit dark, it entranced me. But I couldn't go and see the film on my walk to school as well, and I could walk in there and there would be a box of bubblegum cards called Shocking Laughs, made by Topps, and you could get 3 cards in there. This is before the days of Panini and just after the days of cigarette cards, really. It's the bit in between.
I remember those.
And Topps produced this bubble gum that wasn't very nice, to me anyway. It was very powdery and a bit chalky.
Sometimes they were snapped in your fingers as well, didn't they?
That's the stuff. But with that horrible bubble gum came 3 full color images from Hammer horror films, showing Dracula and the various characters, these damsels in distress. And that hints of that Victorian world that and the darker Victorian world that fascinated me, a world of ghosts and the paranormal and the strange. And it just entranced me. But if people can remember these cards, they were small. The ones that came after that were all about Star Wars in the Topps bubblegum cards. These were the forerunners, and they were on cards. You could swap them in the school playground. But I must admit, I used to keep mine in my pocket, and I'd look at them, and they started to give me nightmares. And they weren't confiscated from me, but I can remember
nightmares from a cold, eh?
I did. I got nightmares because of them. But the point is, yeah, I had to give them to my mum and say, throw them away. I don't even want to see them in the bin. They were that frightening. But that's that forbidden fruit when you're a kid. And if you think the number of people that I've spoken to, they remember those cards, and they remember their first ever sight of a horror film. And I'm not talking about shocking, awful horror films. I'm talking about Gothic horror, the Hammer classics.
Yeah.
Some of us may have seen the Universal Draculas, because they did a run of those on BBC Two as a sort of series, or Universal Monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman. And I can remember those. Hammer was startling because it was in color.
Yeah, that's that thing.
So by the time I was sort of 8, 9, 10 years old, they're starting to show them on TV. And most people had a color television as well. But and now this is a cunning thing, you see, because I had one wonderful mum, and I didn't have a dad, which was pretty tough in the 70s as well. But I had wonderful grandparents, and I used to spend a lot of time with them. And they were very wise, my grandparents. Mum, it would be absolutely not. You're not seeing this. But my grandparents knew, and they said, "Yeah, you can watch a little bit." So I'd be allowed. It'd be 10 o'clock, and it wouldn't be on a school night. It'd have to be a Friday night, and I'd be allowed to watch. But they knew full well that I wouldn't be sat in my chair watching. I'd be peeking around the lounge door. I wouldn't even be behind the sofa or the chair, because I would be going. And I remember distinctly the start of seeing Dracula AD 1972 is this incredible chase across one of the London parks. And Christopher Lee's whipping up this carriage, and that he's fighting with Peter Cushing on the top of the moving horse-drawn carriage.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they tumble off, and Peter Cushing is thrown off, and Dracula is thrown off, and the wheel goes tumbling by. And Peter Cushing kind of comes to a little bit. You can tell he's mortally wounded, but there's not blood spurting everywhere, and it's not horrible. His hair's all tousled. But what's happened to Dracula? And I can remember this moment vividly. The carriage had tipped over, and it was shot from underneath the carriage. And there was a step down, and this shoe, a spring-sided shoe, came down. And with it was a black cape with a hint of red inside. You got a flash of it underneath. And I knew, I knew who that was. I knew, I'd seen the cards. It's going to be.
You worked it out, yeah.
And I kind of peeked behind the door and thought, no, I can't look at that. And then I looked around the corner of the door, and there he is with this carriage wheel stuck through his heart. Kensington gore, the brightest blood dribbling everywhere, and his face is a marker. I'm gone. But I didn't have a nightmare, but I was gone. They knew Neil's not going to make that film. But that never left me. That fascination of that Gothic world of the 19th century. And so as time's gone on, as I've grown up, I've wanted to kind of recapture that magic, but not quite so much fear. A little fear is always healthy, but but reclaim it. And I've even recently bought some of the Topps bubblegum cards again. Hooray!
Really? Oh, what? That probably cost you a fortune, didn't they?
they are not cheap.
No.
Now, against
things
the rules,
like that are crazy. Yeah.
Against the rules, those watching on YouTube, there's my pack of Topps cards. For those who can't see these, who are listening in, they're small, and each one of them had jokes on them as well. But they're quite lurid, some of the pictures. But I don't know, it's capturing some of that that magic again, and some of the magazines like Scream magazine.
Yeah, I remember the old monster magazines and things.
From the same people that did very much in the sort of Eagle style of magazine. There were Hammer, they called it Hammer House of Horror or Halls of Horror originally. I've bought a few of those because I've always collected the older books, but I lost a really good friend, my friend Andrew Selwyn Crome, who was a wonderful knowledge of Hammer films and Amicus, the portmanteau films, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, another Peter Cushing one. Yeah.
Well, if we want to go down, I tell you what, you know that some people play the game of Name the Magnificent Seven.
Yes, I could do that. I've seen that about 65 times. So.
You've got it. Now, what about Dr. Terror's House of Horrors?
No,
Can you name the lineup?
Roy Castle was in it.
Right, now there we are, you see. You've got the carriage on a train. For those who haven't seen it, and your lives are worse for not seeing this, ladies and gentlemen, watch it because it's a portmanteau film with different stories relating to each of these characters. And if you like a little bit of horror, but without the scary stuff that will really give you nasty nightmares, this is the one for you. So, yeah, it's one of my favorites. So, yes, we've got Roy Castle, who, surprise, surprise, plays a jazz musician.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I could name any more. I don't know. I think the reason he stood out to me is because I thought he seemed strange in a film like that, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's Christopher Lee's in it as well.
Oh, of course, yeah, it would be, yeah. I know Peter Cushing was the main character.
Yeah. And then who comes waltzing in that carriage? It's only Alan Fluff Freeman, mate.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, I don't remember that.
And Fluff comes in, and he's one of the characters as well. But then, in all his youthful glory, comes in the one that everybody forgets this one, Donald Sutherland.
Oh, yes. No, I don't remember that at all.
You've got to check it out, folks.
I'm going to have to get hold of that film then.
Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. And I'm not going to spoil the story, you know, because the joy of that film is the story. I've watched it many times, and my friend Andrew and I used to love getting some Stilton cheese, some port, and sit at night and watch it, and sometimes gossip through it, and sometimes fall asleep. It would be that late night film, set the world to rights, and whenever I see that, I shall think of my dear friend. I miss him very, very much.
I appreciate that. I got to say I'm a bit older than you, so I can remember actually going to the pictures to see a lot of those Hammer films. To be honest, some of them,
the magic.
The one I can remember the most as being the best one was Dracula, Prince of Darkness with Christopher Lee. I thought that was fantastic as a movie.
Absolutely. And how does it
still stands up now? But
at that time that you saw it, how did it strike you? You've gone to the cinema, you paid your money. You're used to seeing a lot of black and white. This is going to be colour.
Oh yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it. I mean, we never had colour TVs either back then.
There'll be plenty of people having a smoke. There'll be a fog in the cinema.
And the old castle. That's right, fog in the cinema with everyone smoking. Yeah, right. And the cinema would be full. And there were big cinemas back then as well. You know,
1,000 people,
yeah,
in a decent cinema.
In the circle cities. As well. That's right. I've even been in cinemas where they've all been standing around their sides for some strange reason. When it's been full up, they actually come in and stood up.
When I was a kid in the local cinema, North Walsham, and it's gone for years, but you know, if it's a kids' film, it would be packed, and you'd sit on your mum's lap, to watch the film.
I know,
incredible.
It was incredible. As I said to you, I'm a big Elvis fan, and a lot of the Elvis films when they used to come out, people used to be standing around the back, you know, rather than sort of all the seats will be full up, the circle as well. And it was just wonderful. You can't imagine it now, you know.
No. And did people jump in those days when they saw horror films?
Yeah. With certain ones, or sometimes they'd have a laugh as well, you know.
Oh well,
you get some of that as well. I think with even with some of those Hammer films, it make you giggle a bit. Some of them,
Well,
some of them were a bit hammy, weren't they? You know.
but
but I found them very atmospheric. I love the castles on the walls and all the and the creepiness. But I thought Christopher Lee was Christopher Lee really made that Dracula character. I thought he was quite terrifying, really, as that character.
I believe he was. And the intriguing thing is, I've got 2 little granddaughters. One's just 1 year old, bless them. But the other one, there's a bit of a gap between their ages. The other one's 10. And of course, my son's a dad. You know, they've got they're lovely folks, her parents. And I get on well. And I said, look, would you mind if I showed Ivy some of these tops cards that used to frighten me when I was a kid? Yeah, that's all right. I showed them to Lawrence, and yeah, that's all right, Dad. Have a look. So I showed Ivy, and it was just a funny man in a suit.
Yeah.
I said, is he frightening? No, you know, it was like a shrug. And some friends of ours, we had discussed it with the parents. They looked and said, oh yeah, we remember those cards. Had a look, and the kids, no, and there's Dracula, there's the blood on his teeth, or the woman's had a bite in the neck. You know, it's not, these are not horrific cards, but they were enough to frighten me when I was a kid. But there's nothing. And I was discussing this with the guys from Haunted Magazine, and I think, and I've talked to other people who are interested in the Hammer films and the Hammer genre, both sides of the Atlantic, and we all kind of we're a similar age, particularly those of us that look through the banisters or around the doors to watch it, and we all felt very similarly. But we might just be the last generation to be scared of TV monsters.
Yeah, you're probably right there. Yeah, because I mean, things are just not scary now, are they? You know, rarely can I be jump. You know, if anything will make me jump now in a movie.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want gore. Gore, for me anyway. I mean, I respect anybody's genre, just don't hurt other folks. And I don't want to expose people to that unless that's something they really want to watch. But that, to me, is not Gothic horror. There's no need for that. But what I'm talking about is a truly spooky film. Spooky characters and a monster, a mummy, a werewolf, Frankenstein, Dracula. This genre that would frighten us. I don't know whether it's because kids see it from an early age, no matter what parents or nannying they do. There is a certain exposure, a skepticism even. I don't know, maybe we were more naive. If you think of the technology that we had at that time, TV was still quite special, you know?
Yeah.
And films were a real treat, not something you could buy on a DVD. When I was a kid, there wasn't even I don't think when I was before the age of 10, I only knew people at high school that had video recorders, the big old Betamax.
That's right.
Do you remember those? Looks like the Battlestar Galactica in your lounge, you know?
That's right. I had a Ferguson Video Star, which was a rental, and it cost me a bloody fortune, I can remember. And that's when you buy a videotape, and it was 10 quid, you know, a bloody videotape. It's crazy. The amount of money I spent on those.
And it's tape. The things can snarl up, wear out.
Yeah.
You know,
I had loads of them as well.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I'll tell you what, I talking about video. I know we're going off the rails a little bit here, but I bought a copy of Alien when you couldn't buy a copy. Before they were actually selling things like that. There was a rental shop where I think it was Radio Rentals or something like that. I rented a copy of it, and I asked him if I could actually get hold of a copy, to buy a copy. And he said, "Well, get you one. It'll cost you about 50 quid though."
Yeah.
But I said, well, okay, then can you get me one? And I'm talking about back in about 1980, I don't know, probably about 82 or something, or probably before that, 81, 82. So 50 quid I would have spent on a copy of Alien on VHS.
It was a wedge of money.
I must have been saying something wrong with my head, I'm sure. I wouldn't do it now.
Absolutely. And you wouldn't have to, because in loads of charity shops you can get them for less than a quid.
Get them for a penny now.
99p. It can be yours. But it is a changing genre. So yeah, it's still pretty much, I think it's worthwhile discussing and getting it out there. And if people do have an opinion or they think counter to that, then that's great to get these discussions and provoke thoughts in good radio talk shows.
I mean, I am actually I want to get a set of the Hammer horror films, I must say, and sort of relive my youth, if you like.
Well, I would say to anybody, if you're into that, do go for your Hammers, but don't forget there's Amicus as well, which there's some smashers in there with well-known actors. There's an Amicus portmanteau films with different stories associated with different characters. And they unpack beautifully. One of them includes Terry Thomas in the most wonderful horror story. If people remember Terry Thomas, he always played the cat
I saw him live
with the little moustache. It's always hello.
No, I remember as a child, my parents taking me to a cinema. I've got a good memory, and he brought out. There was a film called Make Mine Mink. Well, he did a personal appearance at the cinema. So.
Oh right.
And so he actually had a mink waistcoat on at the time. But I think he's still alive, isn't he? I think Terry Thomas. I think he's still going.
I don't know. I think he went a while back. He had some pretty tough times in later life.
I'm thinking of Leslie Phillips. There's another.
Hello. Yeah, Leslie Phillips.
Very much the same type of character. Yeah.
He is, but I think he was more sophisticated.
Yeah. I used to love him. He was brilliant.
He was, and I think Leslie is certainly still with us. Bless him. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we've gone off the rails a little bit here. So, your research into Bram Stoker? I think you told me that you're writing another book. Is that correct?
Yeah. Originally, I'd always loved the Dracula story. And as I was growing up, there were a few books produced. His great nephew was Dan Farson, who was a really good author on crime, darker history, horror. He wrote a book, in fact, a couple of books that were really quite good. One on horror and one just about Bram Stoker and the man who wrote Dracula. Harry Ludlam had written the book, but often any reference to Bram Stoker would say so little was known about the man himself. So it intrigued me for many, many years. Who was Bram? And I thought, if I'm going to write a book, I really do need to bring something new to the table. I'd also got a great interest in Victorian crimes, and if you've got an interest in Victorian crimes, you're most likely going to have an interest in Jack the Ripper too. And I've made the friendship of a wonderful man, one of the world's foremost knowledges on Jack the Ripper, Stuart P. Evans. Stuart, my friend, and we're kindred spirits. And he's a darn good writer, and he's written a number of very well regarded, extremely well researched books on Jack the Ripper. And he's like me, he loves books, loves ephemera, and he knew some of the last. There's still some super ephemera dealers, but there was a kind of golden age in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s when this material was still turning up. And in that time period, there were also the real old dealers who had never got around to sorting their stock out, and they either sold their stock or they sorted it. And some remarkable things that have been hidden turned up, which included this letter, which named a brand new suspect for Jack the Ripper. And it was the letter known as the Little Child letter, written by Inspector Littlechild of the Special Branch. And it led to the discovery of Francis Tumblety, an Irish-born, grew up in America, quack doctor, real, very, very strange character, but a very, very good suspect, highly likely, as it said in the letter, for Jack the Ripper. And that fascinated me. And Stuart and I would often talk about that. And I noticed on his documentary, there was talk of another man connected with Francis Tumblety, and that man was Thomas Henry Hall Caine. Now, Hall Caine, for many listeners, they'll be saying, who the devil's Hall Caine? Well, he was the first man to sell 1 million books in the English language.
Wow.
And people are saying, well, why haven't I heard of him? Well, his books was kind of love triangles. They often had quite a religious tone to them, moral lessons, and really they don't travel for modern audiences. He wasn't a Dickens, although he outsold Dickens in his day. He outsold everybody. He was incredible. He was a contemporary of people like Robert Louis Stevenson that we would know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. But he never created a character that endured for modern audiences.
Wow.
So he's more or less forgotten. But Hall Caine was a very close, and I would say intimate friend, judging by the letters. There's nothing too explicit, because homosexuality was illegal, strongly illegal in those days, as poor old Oscar Wilde found to his great cost. So there's nothing that can give it away overtly, but they're very affectionate letters between Hall Caine and Tumblety. And I knew that Hall Caine was a really good friend of Bram Stoker. In fact, Dracula is dedicated to Homie Beg. If you've got your copy of Dracula at home, ladies and gentlemen, go and have a look. This book is dedicated to Homie Beg. And it was a mystery to people for many, many years who this strange dedicatee is or was. And that people suggested, is it some sort of Middle Eastern potentate? Is it some mystical person? Is it an anagram of a name? Is it one of Bram used to love tricks and sort of in jokes? But no, it wasn't any of that. It's actually Manx. And Homie Beg means little man or little boy. And that's the name that Hall Caine's grandmother, who was from the Isle of Man, that's what she called him. In fact, in later life, when he'd made his pot of money, Hall Caine bought Greeba Castle on the Isle of Man. And he had a sort of summer house outside where he would do all his correspondence. And the correspondence of Hall Caine, it was donated to the Manx archives, but it took an awful lot of sorting. And there were sensitive things in there where certain members of the family, it wasn't a strict embargo, but the deal was, we're not going to release that because they will learn certain things about their family that really, that's not fair. It's nothing horrible, but it's just the family matters. And the archive wasn't sorted, it was just in boxes, so they couldn't easily release it. It all had to come out at the same time. So it was released in around about 2000, but then it took 10 years to sort the thing and catalogue it, because Hall Caine was great friends with some of the greatest authors of his day, people like Wilkie Collins, for example, the man who wrote The Woman in White. But above all, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the painter, and Pre-Raphaelite movement, incredible man was Hall Caine. But he was a great friend of Bram Stoker. And Bram used to sort out his business affairs as well. So originally, I got access to look at the letters between Tumblety and Hall Caine, which were more than I ever expected. And they are the greatest collection of letters of any contemporary Jack the Ripper suspect. So a suspect from 1888. It's the greatest collection ever to be published in any great form. There were letters from various people that wrote into the police about the Jack the Ripper crime, sort of say, oh yes, I know who Jack the Ripper is, he's my great aunt, or the funny man down the street, or a wolf man, or whatever. You got it. But they're all from different people. From actual suspects, genuine police suspects for Jack the Ripper, the special branch suspect, Francis Tumbleweed. It's an incredible collection, and I had those letters analysed as well, which revealed some very dark things. And this was with Ruth Myers, who's a forensic document examiner. So she's not just a handwriting analyst. She's on the register of expert witnesses in the UK and America. So that was a wonderful thing to do. But going through that archive of material, I thought, well, I was on the island for a week. I had my digital camera, a wonderful relationship, and still do, with Manx National Archives. Wendy Thurkettle, the archivist there, was absolutely outstanding. In fact, we went through the last box of Unsorted together, and that was a lovely thing to do. But I found all of these Bram Stoker letters. Now, I'm not saying, oh, yes, I was the only person ever to find them. I wasn't, because the Manx archives had found them. They knew they were there. And dear old Richard Dolby, who was a wonderful Dracula scholar and a man that knew more than I'll never know about Gothic horror, and he was aware of those, and he certainly looked at some of the letters that were released. But I was the first person to see the whole collection when it was properly released, and made some new discoveries. And also Bram Stoker's writing is, to be honest with you, a nightmare. If you try and read it, it looks like looks like a spider's fallen into an inkwell and wobbled all over a page. And I say that with respect, because I love Bram. I'm still very friendly with a number of his family members, his descendants. Dacre Stoker, his great-grandnephew, is a friend, and it's always been enormously supportive, because he knows that, you know, I love the Stoker family like family, and I respect them and the great work that they have done to preserve the legacy of Bram Stoker. And I'm not unique. There are other biographers that love our Bram, and I think, yes, he's our Bram. He's a man that deserves all the recognition he could have. He gave us, to me, he gave us the modern vampire in supernatural, paranormal
character.
nature.
Yeah.
That's what he gave us.
It was only recently I found out that I thought his name was actually Bram, but it means Abraham, wasn't it? And I only found that out recently.
We find all of these things out along the way, and he's Abraham. He's actually Abraham Stoker Jr., because his dad was the original Abraham. So the letters on the Isle of Man in the Hall Caine archive were a real discovery. But Bram's handwriting, frankly, is a nightmare. And anybody who knows and loves Bram, we all agree we call it Stokerese, because it looks like a foreign language. It looks like a spider's crawled into a pot of ink and crawled across a page.
He'd have made a good doctor then.
He certainly would, and he was a very highly qualified man in his own right. He studied at Trinity College in Dublin, and in fact, a little bit later in life, he studied at the bar and qualified as a barrister. But his great love was always the theatre, and it was always, he loved writing. And he didn't just write Dracula, he wrote numerous books, many of which, and articles as well, and stories from magazines, and they're still being discovered.
So was Dracula really the only horror thing that he did, or did he sort of venture into other paranormal areas?
Ever since his early writing, he had loved ghostly stories. He loved legends and the paranormal. And his earlier works are published in magazines and compendium storybooks. And you can find lots of elements that he drew on again later. So, for example, he wrote for a magazine, it was a story called The Chain of Destiny, and it was for a magazine called The Shamrock. And in that, but you got the scenario of the old haunted house, and the man going in there, that he's got to do some sort of legal work or some conveyancing, or he's inherited the place. You get the sort of story. It's very much like Jonathan Harker going over to see Dracula. And you could even see at night in the bed, the phantom women come across the bed towards him. But in the original story, Chain of Destiny, they are old hags, wicked old hags. But in Dracula, it's the same scenario, but the women who crawl across the bed are beautiful women, seductresses who use their beauty to fall upon their prey. He was a remarkable man. His stories, after Dracula, for example, he wrote The Jewel of the Seven Stars, which has one of the very first reanimated mummy stories in British horror literature. You'll find a similar story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the late 19th century. But Stoker did something, Jewel of the Seven Stars is different. It's strange. He wrote stories that there's always an element of mystery to them, but there's a more sort of relationships and a bit of love and romance. He wrote very well. Sometimes when a man writes with a woman's voice, you can tell it's a man writing as a woman, particularly in the 19th century. But Bram was very good. He seemed to have this real empathy. He knew and loved women, and women loved him. And it doesn't always have to be in a sexual way. If you were a friend of Bram Stoker, you could be a friend for life. And I mean that, man or woman. He was remarkable like that. So the characters that he paints are very vivid, very real. And he uses an unusual style, which was really pioneered by Wilkie Collins, where different characters will use, one will have a diary. For example, like Mina, but she's got a slightly different way of writing her diary. She types it. And typewriters were brand new, so he's bringing in technology. Dr. Seward at the lunatic mental asylum, where Renfield is, Seward records his notes and thoughts and diary entries on wax cylinders on a phonograph. So to us, it's very antiquated, but in those days, that's the cutting edge of technology that Bram's bringing in. So there's lots of stories, there's lots of channels that you use to kind of trace back where Bram found his original sources. His notebooks are very good as well. They still exist, the notes for Dracula. But also in his letters, there's lots. If you have that time and inclination to read the letters and translate them, there's a lot of new material to learn about Bram from them too. So in 2012, that was when I produced the Dracula Secrets, which looks at the connection between Tumblety and Hall Caine, and how Bram drew on that kind of climate of fear around the Jack the Ripper crimes, and London at that time. So it's quite an evocative book. But I always really wanted to produce a biography of Bram, and I knew that would be a longer process. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment. And hopefully, the last of the transcriptions of the letters that I'm working on will be completed this summer. And fingers crossed, there will be a new biography of Bram Stoker out for Christmas.
Brilliant. That sounds good to me. Sounds really interesting. I'll have to get a copy and get you to sign it for me.
I would be honoured. But to wet your whistle, as we say, this month, May, is the 125th anniversary of the publication of Dracula.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention it actually, but you brought it up anyway. So,
and also this month, it's my 50th birthday. Hooray!
Oh, right.
And within just days of that, I think Peter Cushing has a birthday around this time, would have had a birthday. But what is very, very special is that May this year is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Christopher Lee.
Right, so there's quite a lot of connections there.
So there's a lot of very special thoughts and reflections. So in next month's Haunted magazine, there's a very special feature on Bram Stoker and Dracula to commemorate all of these special things.
Excellent. And that's by you, is it?
They might even have a special guest editor that might look an awful lot like me.
Right, I think you've given the game away.
Ah!
That was fantastic. So what actually, how did you get interested in the paranormal in the past? I know you've written a lot of books about the wartime years in the UK, especially on the East Coast. Did you come across a lot of paranormal stories while researching those types of experiences?
Yeah. All my life, wherever I've gone, particularly, I mean, I'm a Norfolk man by birth. All around my area, North Norfolk, there were stories of Black Shuck. It's one of the oldest ghost stories anywhere in the country, if not one of the contenders for the oldest. It goes back to ancient history, and indeed black dogs, you can find them as a phenomena in Norse legends. The Saxons had a word for skucker or swaka, which is for demon or devil, and it's believed that word is corrupted into Black Shuck, this devil dog of the coast that is often described in the oldest tales as having these burning red eyes. And it seems that the smugglers may well have twisted the tail a little bit around and turned it into
to
one
keep people away, yeah.
In case people didn't want to watch the wall, my darling, while the gentleman rode by.
Yeah.
But wherever I go, I've always collected ghost stories and legends and folklore, because that can so often just get lost. It really can. I began really collecting those stories as a lad, really consciously in the 1980s, certainly starting to record, and that's when there was a generation passing. I could still talk to people who had served in the First World War. That was quite something that had served throughout the Great War. People that had been at Mons, people who had been in Gallipoli, people who had fought on the Somme. So I was very fortunate to know them. My grandparents had both done their bit in World War II, as had their brothers and sisters at the front or on the home front. They all did their bit, bless them. So yes, it was a heady blend of their reminiscences, which were they didn't really talk about the horrors of war. They'd often find little anecdotes and stories they were from their youth anyway, that happened to be during World War II. And I always love to hear ghost stories and legends. So yeah, and then having collected them from around Norfolk and Suffolk, I came up with this idea. I love these old Victorian books, which they used to call them almanacs, and they'd have a Christmas almanac for a particular county, a town, a group of villagers. They might have a deanery or a deanery, an area of parishes.
I do remember those. Do they still do them?
Do you know what? I don't know.
Yeah.
But they were super back in the day, and they would often look back on major events in a listed form. And they would often look at things like hangings, murders, disasters, epidemics. And I thought, well, look, there isn't really anything like that anymore. So I created a series of books called Grim Almanacs. I actually began with a Grim Almanac of Norfolk, if I'm truthful. And my publisher loved it. And jokingly, this was a joke, I said, oh, that's all right. We'll discuss rights for the series. Oh, they said, that's great. Put us in touch with your agent. I didn't even have an agent at that time. But I thought, well, look, if they're serious, and they did take it seriously, I bagged the whole of eastern counties in London. That's my area. And so that was a wonderful thing to do in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I was able to draw on that research from the 1980s, older research, because other people have always been kind, sharing stories and research and recordings and handwritten memoirs of village life and memories. I've always bought them at junk shops and sales, even if they're very tatty. There's some information in all of the scrapbooks. Wonderful. Before you could go online and look at newspapers, I was having to go into libraries and scroll through film.
Yeah.
So it was you couldn't just keyword murder and go click, 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 and it was all wonderful. No, you had to sit on your bum but then you'd get a feel for the newspaper itself. And you'd work out, yes, page 7 on a Thursday, that's got all the local court cases. And if you use weekly papers, it would put you onto these stories. So it was a great time to have a publisher that invested in me doing that, and having the chance to visit places all across.
And really, that's real detective work as well, isn't it? Really, a lot of it.
It was great fun. Being able to go into churches where they have the most remarkable things, still the repositories of the past, or finding tombs that have wonderful and fascinating inscriptions on them, from having a fight with a pirate, like on the Fall the Pirate in Great Yarmouth Churchyard, to going into obscure churches in Lincolnshire, for example, where they have something called a maiden's crant. And a crant is a crown which is made from paper, and they hang them up in memory of women that die as maidens. And some of them have been up there over 100 years, or they have white gloves for maidens' graves or maiden deaths, and they hang those up. Look up in the rafters. I've always wandered through churchyards because the monuments are absolutely fantastic, and they're worth recording, because sometimes they get vandalized or the frost gets them. These things are getting really old, or they get covered in lichen. And it's up to us, I think, if you love your Gothic horror, don't just read your books. Get out if you can. If you're well enough, get out, folks. And most of the cemeteries in towns and cities, they are accessible for even people with disabilities. Get out and explore them. I don't see anything grim in it. Of course, I think they've got
a strange beauty of their own, haven't they?
I do. I do. And I think that the funeral monuments are remarkable things, and the iconography that you can see on there, from the sands of time, when you see in a sand timer, or you'll see, what do they put a skull on? Well, a skull is the memento mori, and that means remember death comes to us all, so make the best of your life right now.
And also, we've got to remember they were put there for people to read, so
they were.
It's an important issue,
And sometimes there are literally stories in stone. I don't claim that I'm the only person to have discovered that. There's all sorts of books. In fact, when I was a kid, there were 2 books I loved, and they were both Shire publications. And one of my dreams came true when I wrote some of my military books and my women's history books that I collaborated on for Shire guides, which I love, because they're only 10,000 words. You've got to be really concise, and you've got to know your stuff. You have beautifully illustrated, beautifully produced books. And it was called Discovering Ghosts from Shire. And I had the Shire Book of Epitaphs, which was quite good fun. Or it was very similar to a Shire, a kind of companion volume from a different publisher, but they lodged in my pocket, and I used to enjoy those very, very much.
That brings me on to a little book of death, which I've got of yours, which I find it's amusing, it's terrifying, it's got some really funny anecdotes in it. What led you to write that?
Well, it came from a lot of years of collecting these folk tales and legends, that the one truth in life is that we're all going to die. You know, Ben Franklin spoke of, you know, only two things in life: death and taxes. It was the wit of it, the humor of it, and yes, sometimes you think, what a way to go. And
I know. There are some amazing stories in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, what was his name? Was it Joe Pooley Newman? Poor fellow, jazz saxophonist, and it was in the early days of an enhancement drug that would increase sexual performance, and he'd had some sort of operation on Mr. Winky. He'd taken a load of this enhancement drug that pumped his penis so full it burst and it killed him.
Oh my God!
What a way to go, folks!
I'd rather not think about that. Yeah.
The thing is, some people would go, "Oh, that's horrible." Well, it is horrible, but
yeah,
I've got a lot of pals who, you know, they've worked, they're soldiers, they're frontline medics, and I mean frontline here in Britain, working in ambulances. They're people that have worked in all sorts of jobs where they're confronted by death. But you do find it's not a sick humor; it's a humor that gets you through. And my friend Andrew, that I mentioned earlier, the book is dedicated to Andrew, because we were fascinated with all of these different stories, and some will make you laugh, some will make you cry, some will make you wince.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a memento mori, to live life to the full, and make sure, you know, that if you if you're going to leave this world, leave it sensibly. You know? And
it's a great little book. I mean, I reckon anyone out there who's listening to this, it's a little book of death, and you can dive in and out of it, and you can read. If you've got 5 minutes to read something, you can sort of just dive in and read something for 5 minutes, can't you, Neil?
Absolutely.
And or you can sit there and read it for hours. It's just one of those types of books.
It really is. It's full of all these little. I've always been a great collector of anecdotes, and I've just put them into files, really. And over the years, they've been able to turn into things like Little Book of Death, and that was great. That actually made the Chris Evans Breakfast Show. That was I wasn't expecting it. I mean, and it was at a time when Damien Hirst's diamond encrusted skull was kind of hitting the news. And so that also got me into some of the nationals as well with coverage for the book. I think it struck a chord. I really do. So it's not everybody's cup of tea. It doesn't mock death. We all must have a very sensible respect of it. But try it. If people enjoy the world of Bram Stoker, if they've enjoyed my Grim Almanacs, then they will enjoy it. It's I think it's gone out of print now, so I must look, and because I'm always collecting these stories. I used to like Nigel Rees, and he did some books on silly graffiti as well, and they inspired me when I was a youngster. I don't know, it just seemed right to create it. I also produced a book which is not full of jokes, but it's called The Little Book of Murder, which is hopefully a handy look.
I've seen that on Amazon. That's another one that because you've written around about 50 books. Is somewhere around about that?
Yes. The people nearest and dearest to me will tell you the number. I'm not so vain I count, but I'm extremely grateful that really for the last, it's going to be nearly 30 years, I've been able to make a living as a historian, and that's thanks to people buying my books, and people getting my books. And I don't just mean going out and buying, I mean understanding what I'm writing, enjoying some of the books that are humorous, but also people that have enjoyed the factual books as well, things like Coast at War. And I've recently produced a book, and I'm working on a second volume looking at really collaborators and saboteurs in Britain during the Second World War. Found some fascinating documents relating to those. So I try and bring something new to the table. I've always thought if the book is not out there on the shelf, and I've got a genuine interest in it, it won't just be a sort of fly by night thing. I hope I can fill that gap. I don't think I'm always unique, but I like to think that sometimes some of the material that I will be bringing to the story will be brand
I think you
new.
underrate yourself. I find you quite unique, actually. I don't think I've ever quite met a character like you. And I mean that in a very, I mean that in a very nice way.
Oh, well,
But,
I guess it's because in life I do have some old-fashioned values, but they're not values that disrespect anybody. I believe everybody should be treated equally and with respect. And if that's old-fashioned, then so be it. I give everybody a chance. If somebody is awful, then
you give what you get. Yeah,
life's too short to worry about them. But to welcome people, to open a door, and hopefully enthuse them. You know, when I was a kid, it was nice to talk to people I knew some really wonderful people with great stories. And if they had not inspired me, I wouldn't be the writer I am now. So I hope very genuinely in this world that I'm one of those people that will enrich your life and maybe inspire people to write their own stories, tell stories. I'm really chuffed that now, after all these years, I mean, I've been lecturing and teaching as well as writing. I mean, some of the young people that I knew and have taught have gone on to become historians, teachers, or people that just love history and reading in their own right. And I'm really proud of all of them to see them grow. And they come and see me at my talks, and it's just nice to catch up with them. Some of the children, I've stayed in touch with their parents because I've said, look, as they go on in life, I want to know how they get on. So the parents keep in touch with me, and then I've seen some of my kids, they've got wonderful memories of some. I mean, we took a group of children who were, the oldest was 11, I think the youngest was 9. We went over and did a battlefield tour. Because they had a wonderful extended study for the First World War centenary. And I worked on all sorts of projects up in Newcastle and Norwich and county-wide projects. It was great. But that was one of my pet projects that I was able to nurture through. But it wasn't all my work. I mean, you've got to have a team of wonderful teachers, parents to support them, and parents that have seen their kids want to get to France to follow these stories of the soldiers that they've been researching. They wanted to go so much, and they trusted us to take kids. I would say the average age was about 10 years old. It's a huge adventure to take them out to France. And I see these kids on the streets, and they'll all speak, and they have those wonderful memories, or the memories of living history events. I helped create some of the very first living history events for school children, residential, at the wonderful Holt Hall in Norfolk, where children were evacuated for 2 or 3 days. And that's one of the inspirations for the TV series Evacuation, which I was also very proud to be one of the historians on that for 2 series. And that was great on CBBC.
I think it's very important to try and make children understand nowadays. I mean, you and I were probably lucky in the fact that we've not been involved in vast world wars and things like that yet. Wait for it. But yeah, I think it's very important what you're doing anyway to make children understand about what it was like in the wars, because I think we just lose touch of what the horrors that these people went through. Anyway.
I think it is important. The one thing that all of this writing, and they're written on horror and disasters and war. When I wrote 2 books on the floods in Norfolk. We had some terrible floods in 1953, as did other areas of the country, of course. But I wrote a volume about Norfolk. Then we did Norfolk floods over the years, 1912, 38, and 53. And I got to meet some of the flood heroes, modest, incredible people from next door that had helped their neighbours, you know, or people, you know, in those days. The ambulance service was run by a joint committee of St. John Ambulance and British Red Cross Society. They were volunteers, only the drivers got paid. It was and firemen, volunteer firemen, and all these services, special constables. You know, it was incredible what neighbours did to help each other. So what's the message? Why bother with all of this? Why should it matter? Well, what matters is people matter. If you watch Brastoff, there's Danny's speech. You know, I thought it mattered. I thought music mattered. But, well, you know the word he used. Does it bleep?
Yeah. I can believe it.
And the point is, people matter. People's stories matter. And if people have gone through a disaster or through a war, then I think it's us, those that come after, we should at least have the respect to try and learn from that. I mean, the men and women of my granddad's and granny's generation, they believed that they were fighting for a world of peace. You know,
look where we are now.
We can just pray for peace. But that's everything. I think any service person, Army, Navy, Air Force, no matter the gender, where they've been, did they fight for war? No, they didn't. They fought to try and bring about and restore a peace. You know, and I just hope and pray that history is better. Churchill said it's better to jaw than war.
Yeah, exactly.
And the old boys that I spoke to from World War I, World War II, they weren't political men, you know, they were countrymen and women, and they country folks, and they just couldn't understand, you know, that this is a world thing, but we got dragged into it, and my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, and it's why we did a real special performance at the Madder Market Theatre in Norwich to mark the 80th anniversary of the worst nights of the Baedeker Blitz on the city of Norwich, because I wanted to make the point, it happened here. It happened here in 1942. We had a firestorm caused by incendiary bombs with a targeted raid on the city. And, you know, we really felt something needed to be said and to build that bridge, that connection with the people of Ukraine today.
Well, we've got about, probably about 8-9 minutes to go. I'd just like to ask you a bit about, you've been doing some television work lately. Is it My House is Haunted? Help My House is Haunted? You've done
Help My
something
House
recently.
is Haunted.
And I think you've done some Most Haunted and stuff like that in the past, but...
I did in some of the early series back in the days of Derek Acora and lovely Yvette Fielding, and what a wonderful team they had there. Richard Felix, what a great thing for
Richard's been on the show before.
And he's a lovely guy, you know, and we've caught up along the way with paranormal events over the years. Always good to see any members of that team, and we were so sad when Derek passed away. I liked Derek Acora. I thought he was a kind man and a kind soul, and that was my experience of him. And I was really pleased that I did work.
I've heard from sources that he was actually a very good medium. It's just that he got sort of caught up in the television world of having to come up with results, and it's time.
Sadly, that's very true, David. When I met him in those days. He was smoking. He was a Benson's man, gold box, and occasionally I'd have a smoke as well. And we were just having a yarn outside. And he said, "Neil, is somebody with you? He's just beside you." And he described. Remember, this isn't on telly. We're just having a Benson's. And he described my granddad, who'd recently, you know, maybe a few months before, passed away. And there he was, and there were certain things. My granddad didn't claim his medals for 46 years. It didn't get a big splash in the press. There was a little article in one of the local press. I'm sure Derek hadn't dug that up, and he was talking about he's very proud of his medals. He said he got them later in life, and you know, it wasn't on display in the museum. We hadn't connected before the show. And all of those things that he was sharing, for that moment, I felt in touch with my very well-loved granddad. So no matter what, it cost me nothing. It was a moment that meant, I'll be honest, the world to me. to have just a little time when I felt that there was some connection with a very much loved granddad, that I don't care. I don't care what it was. That's how it felt to me, and nothing's ever going to change that.
No, I do know that feeling because I've had that myself. Yeah, I mean, your granddad obviously used that that avenue of connection to get to you anyway. By the sound of it,
it was wonderful. It was wonderful. So, and then I've filmed on, I think, 3 or 4 series now for Help My House Is Haunted. I can't say too much about it until it comes out. But it's a dark one.
Is it?
Yeah. We found one story that we thought because they asked me along as a historian, can you tell us about this here? And I felt, oh yeah, this is a story. Yeah, it's a true one. We found the newspaper reports. Yeah, but the haunting itself could well be a lot darker. I didn't get to see that because they keep us separate. I talked to Jane, and I met her at a location not far from Peterborough. I'm sure I can say that much, but and we talked, but it's darker.
Sounds good. You'll have to give me a tip when it's coming out.
I will with pleasure. I will with pleasure. And if we want, at that time, we can come and talk some more about that. And
absolutely.
David, there are some plans for things in the future, and I hate dangling carrots, so it's not. But what I will promise is, if you're enjoying your show, and it's great to see you're back on your show again.
Thank you.
And if people have enjoyed me on the show, then I'll be more than pleased to come and tell you more about that, more about Bram when the biography comes out, Ghosts and Legends, and come and share some more time with you.
That sounds like a good plan. Thank you. It's been great talking to you, Neil. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the time. Because I know you're a very busy man, and we've been trying to schedule this to get it going. And I know you're off again tomorrow.
Yes, so, you're off to France for down to Norfolk, then off to France. For my great uncle was one of the last defenders of a little village called Le Paradis, where 97 of his comrades in the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Norfolk Regiment, were massacred in May 1940. Wow. And we were due to go back on the anniversary. Now, thank God, he was captured outside. It was the men from the farmhouse that were massacred, Headquarters Company. He was one of the outer defenders, and he'd stuck it out. And his officer, there was only 2 of him and his one of his mates left. The officer said, "Make for the beach." And Verdon went one way, his mate went the other, and only Verdon got taken prisoner. And even he they took his tags off and made him put them in his helmet. And they were going to shoot him. But luckily an officer came over and stopped him. But he spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of war. But he didn't know what had happened to his mates until he got back from the released from prisoner of war camp. Bless him. So we should be remembering all of those lads.
Yeah, it's fascinating stories, but horrific at the same time. So we should never forget.
A remarkable generation, a really remarkable generation. Thank you so much for everything, David, and I hope to see you again soon.
Well, I do hope to see you too, Neil, and hope to run into you. And you're always welcome if you're ever down Essex way.
Bless your heart.
Keep in touch, and thank you, Neil, and we shall meet again, I hope. You take care of yourself.
All the best to you.
Safe travels. Thank you.
Take care now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. And I hope you'll join us again next time. My guest will be Kieran Woodhouse, and we'll be talking about ghosts. But in the meantime, if you would like to get in touch with me at any time, my email address is davidyoung2qn@yahoo.co.uk. That's davidyoung2qn@yahoo.co.uk. And by the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, thank you for the introductions, Patrick Moore, Sir Patrick Moore, and Count Dracula. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
paranormal dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.